An issue of great importance, I think, right now is that of the residential schools and the horror story that we've heard coming out of Canada. I think it's important not only because of what it signifies to us in terms of the failures of human beings and human beings within the church, but also because we don't expect that kind of story out of Canada.
Yeah.
That said, we know it has, and people to whom I'm still connected back in the country of my birth and upbringing have expressed real disappointment that figures within the church haven't said enough, at least according to their sense of justice. And I wonder if you have any initial thoughts on what you know of in terms of the residential schools issue.
It's tragic, and it's an awful situation that is sadly not unique to Canada, and we're talking about this today because part of our work within the Centre for Applied Theology is to talk about issues that matter now, but it doesn't matter. Its importance isn't just for Canada; it's for the whole church. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant just to the Roman Catholic Church. It's something that applies to all Christian traditions, particularly those that run care homes and children's centres, where we're caring for vulnerable people. And it doesn't just apply to now, because it applies throughout the whole of the history of the church, particularly the contemporary of the history of the church in the last 100 years or so, where we've uncovered and learnt in the UK, in Canada, in North America, in Australia, in very many countries, and perhaps more countries that we've yet to discover, these appalling abuses of children and vulnerable people, particularly vulnerable women and people of colour and people of First Nations. And the questions that we hear is, how is it that Christians, so-called people who are called to perfection, called to love, and we've talked in other conversations about the God of love, the Christian God of love, how is it that these awful things can happen on our watch? And it seems to me that the churches will admit responsibility and admit liability, as they absolutely should do as institutions, but have no ability to reflect on why. How is it that people within their own church or within their own church institutions can perpetrate such atrocities? Are they Christian? And by that question, if they don't address that question, it then becomes, these atrocities are Christian. And that's the question I think we need to address today.
Yeah, I guess, the thing that corresponds to what you've just said is that even if it's acknowledged as a great sin that has been undertaken in times past, and perhaps, God forbid, but even as we speak, all the apologies in the world will not contend with the why. And what breaks my heart, what actually, I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but actually makes me sick, is the fact that I think that has been insufficiently addressed, the why.
Yeah.
How could this have happened? Now, I have to admit, before we continue, to a deep investment in the question, not least because I grew up as a great lover of Indigenous culture and Indigenous languages and its peoples, but also because I had the deep privilege of serving amongst a particular tribe of people, the Cree in northern Saskatchewan, for the first 5 years, essentially, of my ordained ministry. And the joy I felt then is now retroactively or retrospectively marred, not because of anything they've done, but because of something that a church I represented has undertaken, and or not the church, but rather parts within it.
Yes.
And it makes me frankly tearful to think of everything that the people have gone through at the hands of those who should never have done what they did.
And we can point to and we can rationalise the actions of individuals who perpetrate atrocities on individual children, on groups of children, but when you have mass atrocities, so mass graves in this instance, mass killings, or mass abuse of children or of young women, unmarried women, as in other cases, when you've got large groups and large scale activities, this is much more difficult for us to say this is an isolated incident, or these are individuals. This is a corporate mentality or corporate mindset that has to be informed by theology and sociology to understand what is going on in the minds of not only the people who are participating or perpetrating the acts, but the people who are allowing the acts to happen. So for in the particular cases, the children to be killed, but also the children to be buried. It reminds me very much of some of the genocides that have happened outside the church in other parts of the world, where ordinary people, not just the people who've done the murders, but ordinary people get involved in the hiding of genocides. It was in Srebrenica a number of years ago, where ordinary farmers were pressed into digging the mass graves and hiding the graves, digging up bodies and reburying them. Otherwise law-abiding, mild-mannered people were participating in acts of genocide and genocidal activities and atrocities. So what brings us, what mindset, what mentality, what implicit theology brings us to that point? What are we saying as Christians to allow someone, and not just one individual, but a group of people, to see these children, young women, unmarried women, children who have no parents, orphans, to see them as less than human?
I think that brings us to the crux of the matter. And it must be, I think, from a theological point of view, a profoundly failed Christology. We've talked, as you've already indicated, a great deal of a loving God, and the image of the loving God being at the heart of the good news Christians proclaim. But of course, that extends, or the way we encounter that loving God is in Christ, and we are so often encouraged to recall for ourselves the fact that Christ is in the face of our brother and in the face of our sister. And yet, in each instance that the face of an innocent child looked up at their teacher or their hall monitor, or whoever it was that committed this, they were not seen as the face of Christ, but rather perhaps as the enemy, or as something less than human. And it seems that it's all about a complete misconstrual of what constitutes the face of Christ.
Yeah, and does that mean that somehow there is a failure to see the human being made in the image of Christ, all humans being made in the image of Christ, and therefore somehow some humans are demonic or possessed by demons, or somehow related to Satan, or that there is some sort of form of separation, that there is a group of human beings that are made in the image of God and others are not, that one can, because it seems clear that we should be at least as Orthodox Christians, everyone is made in the image of God, and the likeness of God can be deformed by a sin, but nonetheless the dignity of the human being always remains. But somehow in these circumstances, that child in front of the person is no longer a human being, no longer carries the image of God, but there's something almost that they are being punished or exorcised, or something is going on that is trying to remove the devil. Is that something that we think is manifest in these acts and these atrocities?
I definitely think you're pulling us in the right direction in this regard. To get theological for a moment, we have to go, I think, to the very beginning of time. And what I mean by that is, if we visit the first book of Holy Scripture, we look at the book of Genesis, we read that human beings were made in the image and likeness of God. Now, we know theologically, we know mythologically, in the true sense of that word, that through the first disobedience, we retain the image and lose the likeness, or vice versa. I can never quite remember which it is.
Retaining the image,
we retain the image and lose the likeness, and that's something spoken of by Saint Irenaeus, of course, and it runs through Christian theology. So it runs through an understanding of who we are, essentially from the outset of our establishment in the world. But there are different ways of looking at that, and it seems that we Christians should be compelled to see it in the most generous way possible, but that we fail to. So let me try to explain. In losing the likeness, we move away from the God who creates us, and so we forget perhaps that high calling for which we are originally created or established. Now, God does not let that go. He establishes in our midst prophets, a people, in fact, to remind the whole of humanity of Him, and to remind Him, or to speak to Him, of the whole and on behalf of the whole of humanity. And because He knows that that is insufficient, because we have short memories, He then takes it upon Himself to speak His word into the world that takes on flesh. So there is one that speaks to humanity of God, and one that speaks back to God of humanity, and that is, of course, Jesus Christ. So Christ fulfills that covenant, that original covenant that God establishes. We read that through the texts of the Old Testament. But what of those who have no Old Testament in the formal sense? Well, it seems to me that even Western theology would admit to the fact that outside of the Jewish inheritance of Christians, in other words, outside of what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, are other Old Testaments. Now, I don't mean that in a sort of glib way. I mean it in a very considered way. How can I possibly say so? Consider Dante's journey through the afterlife. Who is his guide but Virgil, the pagan poet?
Yes.
Virgil's natural knowledge of God is such that he is able to reach the upper echelons of Dante's purgatory. That immediately suggests that Virgil is only missing one thing, that is the revelation of God in Christ, which means Virgil's pre-Christian understanding gets him some way toward the one God.
So it's like the law, capital L law, the law being written on the hearts of humans,
Yes.
or even the kind of the knowledge of God being seen through a glass darkly. So although pre-Christian religions don't know the fullness, or even close to the fullness of the Hebrew religion, they at least are moving towards or understand or apprehend God somehow. But do not complete and do not finish and result in the incarnation. So that gives us a kind of sense of what I think I'm hearing you say. For example, the First Nations in Canada, their religions, and forgive me for my ignorance here as a Brit and completely ignorant, but we might then consider their religions to be Old Testamental in that respect.
Yeah, precisely.
And therefore not anti-Christ, not anti-Christian, A-N-T-I, but pre-Christian.
Or anti.
A-N-T-E.
Christian, indeed.
And might lead to Christianity, and should lead to, and must lead to Christianity in order to be fulfilled in Christianity, but not antithetical to or antagonistic towards Christianity.
Which means, of course, that the image of God, well, it is incumbent on the Christian to see the image of God in the face of the pre-Christian, in the sense that, whether the Christian missionary in the early 19th century paddles down a river in Canada or in the United States, or travels to Hindu India, or Buddhist Mongolia, what he or she would encounter are children of God who bear the image of God, who simply, like the Christian him or herself, is in need of fulfillment in Christ. So it's a profoundly generous.
But I'm not
understanding of
convinced that the
humanity.
19th century discoverer of Canada, or the North African mission, or missionary to North Africa, get the words the right way around, that was their implicit theology. My understanding of the history of that period was their implicit theology was these pre-Christian religions were demonic and anti-Christian, and therefore Christianity was brought there to wipe out these religions, not to complete them, and that the demons of those religions were there, were to be destroyed and exorcised. And are we suggesting that perhaps that implicit theology is then still existent in those sorts of the atrocities that we see amongst the Aboriginal the schools, even amongst the the women or orphanages and homes for unwed mothers? The same idea of an anti-Christian as opposed to an anti-Christian.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems that is an instinct that has been borne out in the horrors that we've seen emerge. There was, I believe he was a Navajo theologian, but who said, either the experience of my people before the arrival of Christianity was an old covenant, or I cannot be a Christian. And I wish I could remember that theologian's name, but what he was on to, I think, was profoundly correct. Again, I don't say that glibly, but rather as an expression of the presence of God, of the presence of God's image, and of the universality of God's love, prior to anything that we might interject, must be recognized, and it is recognized by a statement such as was made by that theologian to whom I refer. And where we have failed, there is a great deal to repent of. And I think, in fact, you've mentioned homes for young women, and of course we refer to those with euphemistic terms, but what we mean, of course, is teenage girls who ended up pregnant when they shouldn't have been, perhaps at the age of 15 or out of wedlock or whatever. And we can see, in fact, that the kinds of abuses of which we speak and have learnt recently as perpetrated against Indigenous children were also perpetrated against Irish girls. Or whomever. The fact is, we can extend that and start probing and find that the same kind of approach has been taken, as you've already indicated, globally almost. Yeah. It's just that, of course, what we need to focus on now is the particular horror that's emerging and being attested to by the presence of unmarked graves, numbering now in excess of 1,000.
Yeah. And I think what we're suggesting here is that there is an ante-Christian, a pre-Christian history, a historical pre-Christian for First Nation religions, but also contemporaneously now a pre-Christian state for people who are unaware of Christianity, whose Christianity has been informed by poor TV and poor social media, whose understanding of Christianity has been deformed or harmed. And it's important, I think, for us as we exit this conversation to be aware that the image of Christ still subsists in everyone, without exception, and it's not a question of demonizing and exercising the demons of people who are not Christian, but first recognizing that God is pre-existent in them. They are already made in the image of God, and we are merely assisting God. It's not as if we have to do the work of God to implant or supplant the devil and implant the image of God in them. The image of God is already in them.
Suggesting, of course, that our missionary work consists essentially of something more akin to naming the presence of God and assisting in the joyful realization that comes with the name, almost more than anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it somehow informative, please be sure to click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would also love it if you visited the Centre on the web at www.appliedtheology.org.uk and took out a membership. At £20 per year, your membership is one of the main means of support on which we depend to carry out our work. Finally, look for us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just do a search for the Centre for Applied Theology. We look forward to having you join us.